Welcome, Big Ten fans. This is Big Ten Ted Live. And welcome to another Wednesday night, which means it is time for Big Ten Ted Live. Somehow, someway, made it here for another Wednesday night of Big Ten Talk here on Big Ten Ted Live. It has been a busy week for yours truly, but here we are yet again delivering daily content, videos, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Friday, live stream Wednesdays, and then the shorts as well on Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays. Hope you're all doing well here tonight on Big Ten Ted Live. If it is your first time joining us here for Big Ten Ted Live, just a reminder to hit subscribe if you haven't already. We've got Big Ten content all off season long, every single day. And when I say every single day, I mean every single day. This isn't just a Monday through Friday operation. This is a Monday through Monday operation, as I like to say here. So subscribe if you haven't already. That means you get notifications for when we go live, notifications for when there's a short coming up on the weekends, for videos, all that sort of stuff here on the Big Ten TED channel. You can also interact with the show tonight. A chat is a great way to do that. I got a 2-topic show here tonight, but if you want to go in a different direction towards the end of the program, we can definitely do that. Talk about anything you want. I like kind of going in every different direction, keeping me on my toes as we continue throughout the program. A chat, a super chat, or a phone call. We can get to that a little bit later on in the program if you want to call in and go one-on-one. 715-600-2150 is a great way to do that. So, what are we going to talk about today here on Big Ten TED Live? We're going to talk about Apple. We're going to talk about Amazon. Those are two companies that have been a little bit more active, not just in shipping and the making of iPhones, but they have been more active in terms of sports and live sports television. Since they're not really television, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. Should they put on the brakes? More Apple than Amazon, but should Apple put on the brakes? Should Amazon come with them in terms of putting on the brakes on the Pac-12 and maybe keeping an eye on the Big Ten? Because I've got a proposal. I've got something that could make money for the Big Ten and its member schools. Something that could make money for Fox, make money for West Coast schools, make money for Apple TV Plus and Amazon Prime. Got all sorts of things. A scenario that could happen as well as a plan B. Now, once again, if they divert from the Pac-12 and go to the Big Ten, you know kind of what that means for the Pac-12. But that's just the price of doing business these days, isn't it? In college sports. Also, we're going to talk about those Saturday spring games, because we were kind of shown a lot as it pertains to Nebraska's spring game, as it pertains to Wisconsin's spring game, as it pertains to Minnesota's spring game. Going into the spring games, there were some teams I thought, well, yeah, they're going to come out and they're going to look good and everything. But the team that maybe came out looking the best, I did not expect going in. So we will get to that as we continue here throughout the program here tonight. Thanks for everybody for tuning in here tonight to Big Ten TED Live. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. Let's talk turkey and let's talk television. Apple TV and Apple TV Plus right now seems to be the leader in the clubhouse for Pac-12 media rights. They want it. Pac-12 trying to figure out the right price to go to their university presidents to try to sign a deal. Amazon Prime, although they're not as involved in Pac-12 media rights talks right now, they've still been floated out there. They've been floated out there with the Big Ten. They've been floated out there with other sports packages right now. In this scenario, we're going to bring them both together under a proposed deal that could add a lot for the Big Ten, add a lot for Apple, add a lot for Amazon, add a lot for just everybody involved. Now, as I said before, Apple and the Pac-12, they seem to want to work together right now. What's it going to take for Apple TV Plus to put on the brakes and quit looking at the Pac-12 and maybe look over here towards the Big Ten? Same with Amazon. We know Amazon's maybe not as involved with the Pac-12. Maybe we don't know that. Maybe they are. Who knows? But what's it going to take for these two to look over to the Big Ten right here and right now and maybe work out a deal that could see the Big Ten go up and down the West Coast and maybe see 2 additional time slots as well? In order for Apple to put on the brakes and look over to the Big Ten's got to come out and say, this is what we have to offer. What do they have to offer? Time slots and television windows. Additional time slots, additional television windows. Okay, let's get into it. Let's crunch the numbers, baby. Let's get into the nitty-gritty as it pertains to the Big Ten and these streaming providers. Okay, right here and right now, the Pac-12 is expecting around $30 million per school per year with their new TV deal. According to John Wilner, a few other sources that I did in diving for this information, that's what they want right now. That's what they're looking at right now. $360 million total per year. That's the base that we're working off of right here and right now. So considering that information and knowing that information, what can the Big Ten offer? Time slots, television windows. They have 2 additional ones, and then they got something. I got something very interesting that we're going to talk about as well. Friday night. There have been 2 Big Ten games recently that have been flexed to a Friday night. Wisconsin at Purdue this year will be on a Friday night. Nebraska against Illinois will be on a Friday night. Maybe, just maybe, they're priming Big Ten fans for a potential move to a Friday night. That's been kind of floated out there by more people than just me. That would involve all of the teams in the Big Ten. And you have Big Ten After Dark is another thing that the Big Ten can possibly offer away from the Pac-12. West Coast teams only. Because in order for the I was about to say Pac-12 After Dark. No. In order for Big Ten After Dark to really work, you need 6 teams up and down the West Coast. Because that's 16 games when you factor in UCLA, USC, Stanford, Cal, Washington, and Oregon. You know, some of those games are going to get picked up by an NBC in prime time, maybe a CBS in the mid-afternoon, which would be around noon Pacific time. You know those are going to get picked up at some point in time. So that's why you need the extra games. You need the extra game because if you take away, like, for example, Stanford and Cal, now you only have 10 games. You flex some of those. Maybe there's a partial package in there as well. Maybe. But in this scenario, to make it worth their while, to make it worth the value, you want it every single week. And you can definitely stagger that with scheduling. And here's maybe the biggest punch of all towards an offer for Apple TV Plus and Amazon Prime Video. Streaming rights for Big Noon Saturday. Okay? Because Fox is really the only major provider right now that doesn't have a streaming service. NBC is Peacock. CBS is Paramount Plus. ESPN, of course, ESPN ABC. They've got ESPN Plus. Fox doesn't. They have that Fox Sports Go app, and I know there's some sort of thing there, but it's not a legitimate. I guess you could say it's a legitimate app, whatever. But, you know, in terms of the oomph that some of these other streaming services provide, Fox doesn't really have one to offer. They could very easily sell off their streaming rights. Let me explain. Let me kind of break down how that all would happen. It's very easy. Like, I work in broadcast television here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area as a replay operator. A lot of times, like, you do a Timberwolves versus Nuggets game, and there's a home broadcast and there's an away broadcast for the regional television providers. And the Fox broadcast would kind of be like the home. That's where all the resources are coming from, and a lot of the video feeds, the replay feeds are going over to Apple TV Plus, and then all they have to do is put their graphics on it. There are minimal production costs involved for Apple TV Plus, and they get some of the biggest games of the year in college football. That's definitely a plus for Apple TV Plus. That's definitely a plus for those involved. Okay, how much would this cost? Because as we know, money is such a big factor in all of this. Right now, based on what we saw before, that base amount that we were working off of, Apple and Amazon pay $150 million per year each they split the exclusive rights for Friday night and the Big Ten After Dark games. Because Apple TV Plus has Friday Night Baseball right now that goes through the end of September, you would likely have Amazon Prime Video take over the first 6 games of the year, and then the last 6 games of the year would be on Apple TV Plus. And then you'd split the After Dark games as well. So you'd split those two, and then you'd split the streaming rights for Big Noon Saturday. All of this put together packs a pretty significant punch. Okay, if you factor in streaming rights for Big Noon Saturday, if you look for the Friday night games, you look at the After Dark games, and at $150 million each for Apple and Amazon, that's not bad considering these facts. Amazon paid and pays $1.3 billion per year for Thursday Night Football, for that NFL product. This at $150 million. Here, let me reach into my pocket and give you $150 million. That's kind of where we're at with that in the right here and the right now. Apple pays $250 million per year for Major League Soccer. Those are exclusive streaming rights. Those are exclusive streaming rights to Major League Soccer. They also pay $85 million a year for Friday Night Baseball. So financially, for both of these companies, for Apple and for Amazon, this is something that could be possible financially. And that's why I didn't mention ESPN in this. ESPN is going through a whole lot of layoffs right now. They are a financial mess. They turned down a deal in the initial media rights negotiation where they turned down a deal where they'd be paying around $50 some odd million a year. And it just wasn't going to fly. That's why ESPN is not involved in this particular situation. Let's go back to the graphic. Oregon, Washington, Stanford, and Cal would enter the Big Ten at a reduced share, around $35 million a year on average. That gets you to $140 million a year. Out of that $300 million, because we got $150 plus $150, the remaining $160 million would be split evenly to the other 16 Big Ten schools, and that makes them $10 million per season. This is a scenario where Apple TV Plus and Amazon Prime, because look at that number again at the top that we talked about right off the top of this, 360. Even at tier 1, say they're paying $200 million for Apple TV Plus, and they're paying $200 million for this. Yes, the Big Ten packs a lot more ratings, packs a lot more value, and you spread your streaming service a little bit more nationwide, so you can maybe get more push and subscribers out in other part of the country instead of just the western part of the country. But we know, because of where these companies are located, Amazon is located up in Seattle, Cupertino in the Bay Area kind of for Apple, you know that the West Coast is probably important. Now, I'm going to get into the buts. This is a solid plan, but what about the fan bases at places like Stanford? What about the fan bases at places like Cal? Especially when we talk about Big Ten After Dark, right? Because when we talk about CBS and we talk about NBC, Oregon, Washington's becoming a really good team, USC, UCLA, some of those games, they might be played on an NBC. They might be played on a CBS. They're not going to be playing on a Fox. You think they're going to play a West Coast game at 9 o'clock in the morning? I don't know. That's a whole nother discussion for another day. But when I look at this and I look at what's going on the West Coast, I worry about the fan support at places like a Stanford and a Cal and places like that. And I think that is, I think, a big thing why maybe this particular situation, and I want to go on record and saying this is just something that maybe could happen. I don't think it will happen. I maybe don't even think it should happen. I just think this is a scenario financially where it matches up and provides more value at maybe the same amount of money for a company like Apple when you go with the Big Ten over the Pac-12. Like you could, there's also this plan B that you can go into this thing and say, well, okay, Amazon comes in and says, well, I don't really like sharing. I don't want to share because we've got Thursday night football and we can promote the heck out of a Friday night Big Ten game. What do you say we scrap the after dark? We just keep it Friday nights and we keep it 16 teams or maybe add Oregon and Washington. If you kept it at 16 teams and they say they put in $200 million a year, right, for Friday night football and the streaming rights for Big Noon Saturday, even if it was just Friday night football, right, $150, $200 million. You add nobody, you add no teams, that's making these Big Ten schools an extra $12 million. You add Oregon and Washington, that brings it down to $8 million at that reduced share. When you factor in all of these situations, the point is, with these additional time slots, especially that Friday night time slot, there is still money to be made, right, with Big Ten media rights. I don't know if it's over. Maybe it is over. Maybe we're moving on to the next thing. Maybe the media deal is the media deal and we're not doing everything and this is just off-season talk right now, right? You know, it could just be ways for people like me and others to fill time in the off-season and let our minds wander a little bit, which is fun. I will admit it is fun, but it's just it's something that maybe we think of to really get traction here in the off-season. But these are scenarios where money can be made and exposure can be gained already than it already has. Now, considering all of this, the answer to the question is yes. Apple TV Plus and Prime Video should look towards the Big Ten, even if we're not adding any other teams. Even if we're not adding other teams. And the reason I talk, quickly I'm going to divert, the reason I talk about Big Ten After Dark only being West Coast teams is I'm not going to expect an Iowa, a Nebraska, a Rutgers, Maryland, definitely not those schools out east, to stay up that late to watch their team, whereas that is prime time for those 6 schools out on the West Coast. These are all scenarios where things could work financially, where maybe, well, the point I'm trying to make, is that there is still things out on the table that can be gained financially, and that's what we know this whole deal pretty much all revolves around. There are still things to be gained financially out there for our beloved B1G. I firmly believe that they're going to talk. I'm not saying anything's going to happen. I have a feeling that these things aren't done, especially with a guy like Tony Petitti coming in May. Remember, the USC and UCLA deal was later on in the summer. Okay, these things, when he takes office sometime in May, these things are going to heat up, and it would not surprise me to see these discussions heat up. I will say this. I would love to see, I think out of all of these scenarios, maybe an additional Friday night game on Amazon Prime Video might be the best solution. Okay, because I see in some of these comments here that says, well, I don't know if After Dark is the best time slot. And that may be true. I'm a little bit torn. The reason why After Dark might work at a 10:30 Eastern time slot is because they would be all West Coast teams. And then, you know, that helps promote West Coast football to the masses, but are the masses watching that game? And do people care about teams like Stanford and Cal and stuff like that? That's all things that need to be talked about as we continue to shuffle on. But it is a proposal. It is merely something to think about as we continue to go on. So let's get to some comments. So let's kind of check in on the folks here on the live stream tonight. The Buckshot Kid is joining us here this evening, as well as Jared Jones. Welcome in, as well as Greg. Appreciate you for joining the live show here tonight. Jared would prefer either one, but Apple TV Plus preferably for him. Right now, Apple TV Plus a little bit more invested in live sports. We'll see how much Amazon, maybe the thing with Amazon, they spent all their money. Maybe they spent all their money on Thursday Night Football NFL rights. Some people think that they overpaid for those NFL games. Jared also chiming in saying, I don't think the West Coast teams like the After Dark games. Maybe that, and that could be a big reason. And maybe that was a big reason why USC and UCLA ended up leaving the conference, because these After Dark games prevent exposure, prevent people watching in the rest of the country. And maybe that's the big reason why. So maybe it makes all of this a moot point. Something to think about there. Gerald McKinley chiming in. I'd be more open to streaming if there's one spot to do it all from. Not looking forward to the Big Ten app, the NBC, CBS, Apple, Amazon, etc. This leads me into a very interesting point, because I did a video early on this offseason. What will the Big Ten look like in 2030? We're going to see some games on Peacock. Of course, there's going to be stuff on Paramount Plus, for the streaming on the CBS side and all this stuff. We're going to get more into streaming on the Big Ten side of things. It would not surprise me in 2030 to see we have a linear broadcast rights package negotiated, and we have a streaming broadcast rights package negotiated. I mentioned it earlier. Look what happened, and look at what is happening with Major League Soccer. Exclusive streaming rights. Exclusive to Apple TV Plus. And then you have some linear games on Fox and FS1 or whatever. Maybe Peacock, Paramount Plus, Apple TV Plus, Amazon Prime Video, maybe they're all going to get in there and they're all going to battle it out. And Tony Petitti's going to look back and says, whoever offers me the most money will be the exclusive streaming partner of the Big Ten Conference. Maybe we'll have, because the Big Ten Plus deal right now, I'm not going to lie, it's not great. It's not something that a lot of people are subscribed to or invested in. Maybe we could have an additional package on the streaming provider of the Big Ten Conference, where you can watch classic games, right? A lot like the WWE and Peacock relationship, where you can go back and you can watch the 2002 Royal Rumble, or you can watch whatever. That's the relationship. Of course, they had the old WWE network as well, but the Peacock and them have formed into a relationship where they have, older things as well. So there's streaming. I think eventually when we get to 2030, I saw an article today about, it was a Colorado chancellor, maybe president, I can't remember. He says, we're going to learn a lot about streaming as we head towards 2030. What the probable situation, I honestly believe the Pac-12 is going to go to streaming because they don't have any other choice. I honestly believe that. I don't know if ESPN right now is in a situation where they have the money or they want to invest, and they're pinching pennies right now at the worldwide leader. Greg chiming in. I bet you don't need 6 West Coast teams. Strategic out-of-conference scheduling. Bet you could do with 4 total. Split the 3 once games across the season as possible. There's also, that's a good point, because there's also the possibility of a Big Ten After Dark package where it's not the whole season. I'm saying if you want the whole season, if these networks in this specific scenario, if they want to be able to go out and they want a package throughout the entire season. You need the 6 games, just have the sheer amount of games. But if you want to do a 6-game Big Ten After Dark package, you want to do 4, whatever you want to do, however many games you want to throw in there, that's certainly possible, just with a little less money involved over there. Greg saying also schedule 2 Big Ten games per week out west as well. You would definitely need more than USC and UCLA. Trojans and Bruins can't have a home game every week. Greg also chiming in some good comments from Greg here today. I don't know if sports bars around the country will buy lots of streaming apps. A lot of times, right now with sports bars, at least it was, hey, you get one cable package, buy the biggest and baddest cable package and throw it on, flip the channel, do whatever. But now with all these streaming services, it's a little bit harder to get to. I'm not sure. I'm not a guy that really goes to sports bars, so I wouldn't know if they carry like Friday night baseball on Apple TV Plus. I know there's a Sunday leadoff for baseball on Peacock. That's this whole thing that we all got to figure out with the changing times of streaming services right now. How is this all going to work? I always think there's going to be a place for linear. There's always going to be a place. Fox, CBS, NBC ain't going away, folks. They're always going to be there. But they have, like the NBC has Peacock, CBS has Paramount Plus. I mentioned how Fox doesn't have one right now and where maybe they could make some money by selling off their streaming rights. But they're always going to be there. I don't know what's going to happen to the ESPNs. I don't know what's going to happen to some of the cable networks. That's where things might get a little bit dicey. But we're just jumping into this, man. We just had our first season of Thursday Night Football on Amazon Prime Video. We're just jumping into the streaming world, really, with live sports. It's been, a year for that baseball package on Friday night. This is in its infancy, folks, and it's going to continue to get bigger. If we've learned anything, I think we've learned that it's going to continue to increase and increase and increase. Yes, it would be nice to have a place where all of the streaming services are in the same place. That would be great. More comments coming here today. Here's an interesting one. Put the lower-tiered Big Ten teams on Fridays, such as Maryland, Rutgers, Nebraska, and Indiana. I think if you add a time slot at this point in time, you want it to be able to draw. I don't think you want to put your worst of your worst on a Friday night. I understand why you might think that, and because it's not the biggest and baddest time slot, so to speak. But if you want Friday night, just like how the NFL, if you want Thursday night to really succeed, you need to put it in the rotation where you can have big time games each and every single week. That's where you need to get to. Maybe if you added a Friday night time slot, and if Amazon Prime really paid up the big bucks saying, well, I see you're sitting there at $200 million. If you go to $250, $275, maybe even $300 million, maybe we could put you in the rotation where you have a game of the week with Fox, with CBS, with NBC. So maybe you see Ohio State take on Penn State with a lot of Big Ten championship implications on the line on a Friday night. Talking about a guy like me that works on a majority of fall Friday nights because of high school football coverage, I might not like it a ton, but I realize that it is a time slot that can be taken advantage of by the Big Ten. I realize it is a time slot that can go ahead and make some money and create some exposure because no one has really gone all in on Friday night so far. Tell teams that are more on streaming to meet certain guidelines to make it off. I think the thing we want with streaming is we want it to add to the exposure of the conference. And I don't think streaming services are coming to the Big Ten to air Rutgers and Northwestern. You kind of catch my drift. I don't think the Apples and the Amazons of the world, where they don't have a linear network attached to them, I don't think they're coming aboard when you've got Indiana and Rutgers playing, or whoever, insert whatever bottom tier teams here. I think you've got to provide them a reason to come on board. I think that's the way you got to approach this thing with streaming. I mean, it's fine to stay where you're at, and there's a strong possibility that Fox, CBS, and NBC is going to be it. USC and UCLA is going to be it, and we're going to stand pat. Because when you really look at the history of realignment, I kind of dug into this a little bit as well. Okay? I really dug into this. Very rarely, and I know I may be contradicting myself a little here, but the point at the top of the show was really not, hey, this is what should happen, this is what ought to happen kind of thing. It was just an option for a lot of people to make some money and get the conversation started. But I will say this, when it comes to realignment moves, it has been very rare where more than 2 teams have been taken at one time. So when we talk about conference realignment, and we talk about maybe adding more potential teams to the Big Ten Conference, I suggested 4 teams here, but if you go back to the history of realignment, especially recently, Penn State was added as a singular, Nebraska was added as a singular, Rutgers and Maryland as a duo, USC and UCLA as a duo. You look at the SEC, from 10, they expanded to South Carolina and Arkansas. From that, they expanded to Missouri and A&M. From that, they expanded to Oklahoma and Texas A&M. A lot of times conferences don't expand with a bunch of teams at a time, because the more teams you add in an even distribution in terms of revenue, that's more that they have to split up at that point in time. And you need a big chunk of money to really make that up. If you add, I know the Big 12 recently added 4 teams, but they were down to 8 teams. So they needed to really get that amount of teams back up there. You look at the history of other conferences throughout the years, very rarely do you add more than 2 teams at a time. So although maybe adding all 4 of those teams, Oregon, Washington, Stanford, and Cal, brings you additional media markets, maybe brings you a few more things, the realism, like I said at the beginning of this, maybe it's not the most realistic thing, but it is something, and it's not necessarily about the scenario that was presented. It's more about the money that's at stake and about the networks out there that are saying, well, we want to talk about the Pac-12 when the Big Ten is also sitting out here as well. Jared Jones talking about ratings. Nebraska's down, but they bring in ratings. That is for sure. That's the thing, I think, when the Huskers were added to the league, that a lot of people knew and that a lot of people expected, is that they bring a huge fan base. They probably bring one of the biggest, if not the biggest, fan bases in the entire conference. Okay, and even when they're winning 3 games, and even when they're winning 4 games, Nebraska's still drawing a lot of ratings. Like, you look at their ratings, you look at ratings on the Big Ten Network, you even look at some of these big noon games that they have been involved in. These are games that have been highly rated and highly viewed because the Nebraska fan base is big, the Nebraska fan base is wide, and people care about Nebraska even when they're down. Brian chiming in. Hi, Ted. Hello. Will the average Big Ten fan want to shell out for Apple TV Plus or Amazon Prime Plus Peacock, Paramount Plus? These subscriptions add up. So I'm going to dive into that, and I'm going to talk about this little by little in this statement from Brian. Will the average Big Ten fan want to shell out? Probably not. I'm going to be honest with you. But here's the thing. They don't need to shell out for Peacock. They don't need to shell out for Paramount Plus because those games are on NBC and those games are on CBS. I won't be shelling out for those. I can tell you that right now. Okay, if you need to give people a reason. That's why when we talked about streaming before, you just can't put Rutgers and Indiana on a Friday night Amazon game. Yeah, people aren't going to add subscriptions to Prime Video for Rutgers against Indiana. people are going to add subscriptions to Prime Video when Ohio State is taking on Penn State, when Michigan is taking on Wisconsin, those types of games, when it's in the rotation as some of the bigger games in the conference on a Friday night. That's when people are going to you need to give them a reason to subscribe. If you don't give them a reason, then nobody's going to subscribe. You won't see the return on investment, and it will be a failure. And then you're going to have to adjust from there. There are exclusive games coming in on Peacock. Those will probably be some of the lower games, maybe replace some of those second Big Ten Network games that we were talking about. With two extra teams in the conference, that's another thing we need to talk about as well. The more you build and expand the conference, the more time slots and the more networks that you need. Right now, there are 2 Big Ten Network crews. There are 2 Big Ten Network broadcasts. And there's a lot of these that are going remote to try to save money, where they're doing a majority of the broadcast out in Chicago. So they're trying to save money. You're going to need additional people with additional schools that maybe come in to the conference. What about YouTube TV? Now we're just opening a whole kinds of boxes here, right? They just got Sunday Ticket. They are also investing into sports. YouTube TV is an interesting one, right? Because they carry a live, we'll call it a cable package for lack of a better term. They cover a live package of channels. But they are also now getting something like Sunday Ticket. That's also one to look for. Google has all kinds of money, and they haven't gotten into this. Maybe there's someone to keep an eye on. The point is, there's options, brother. There's options out there that the Big Ten can certainly go after to get their product expanded and really go into the streaming market. How much the Big Ten is going to be willing to want to do that, I think, is up for debate. I think that's very much up for debate right here and right now, because they've got as good a deal as anybody with Fox, CBS, and NBC right now. They've got it good, man. How much do they really need streaming if they don't go beyond USC, if they don't go beyond UCLA, if the Pac-12 gets it figured out? Maybe more other conferences, other sports leagues are going to be on streaming and kind of go off from there. Jared Jones chiming in. The problem is there's only 3 good TV windows, your noon, your 3:30, your 7. These Friday night games are going to struggle to draw ratings, I fear. It's been talked about forever, what they call it, the Friday night death slot, when you talk about, just television shows airing in that area. You got to think that maybe coaches wouldn't like it either, right? They have a home game on a Saturday night. They can go visit in-state recruits during their Friday night game. Now you see 2 Big Ten games flex to a Friday night. Maybe this is becoming a little bit of a trend. Maybe the Big Ten is dipping their toe in the water to see where things are standing on a Friday night. That could be what's happening. What are the ratings going to be? It depends who's playing. It really depends who's matching up in the game. I firmly believe that. It depends who's playing. That is such a big part of this. That's why adding additional markets, adding big-time teams like a USC into the conference has been a good idea. So now you got to go, when you add future teams in the future, do you add teams that are good athletically or academically, research, markets, all this stuff? What are your priorities in terms of adding teams? Depends what your priority, but depends what Tony Petitti's priority is as a commissioner. Gerald chiming in. I don't think the Michigan, Ohio State, USC, Penn State, those tier 1 types are going to be put on streaming, exclusive streaming. Too many networks want a headliner to push them down that far because you got Fox, because you got CBS, because you got NBC. So by Gerald's thinking here, and this is a good point, when you look at Gerald's point, you got Fox, CBS, and NBC. Of course, they want programs that draw. They're going to have the top pick week after week after week after week. And those 4 programs right now, that is tier 1 television right now in the Big Ten Conference. Those teams are, I don't want to say a lock because, with 3 games, you got 6 teams that can be in it. But, man, it's going to be a possible rarity when these teams aren't on those big-time games and those big-time networks on NBC, on CBS, those types of networks. And then, you could maybe throw in the Nebraska fan base. Maybe if they get good again, Wisconsin, teams like that, Iowa, I think you could throw in there maybe as well. But those are the teams. And you may be right that said they wouldn't be put on streaming. So now you go down to the next tier, and maybe those are the teams, your Wisconsins, your Iowas, your Michigan States, your Nebraskas, your Minnesotas, teams like that are maybe put on streaming. So then you got to ask yourself with a streamer, where does that put the value of the games that I'm talking about? These are all very good questions, and we are just diving into this as a sports world. We are just dipping our toe into the water right now as it pertains to streaming. Right now with streaming, it's so new, it's so fresh, it's just so hard to predict what's going to happen. So hard to predict what's going to happen. Going to talk about more stuff on the show here today. We're going to talk about Big Ten West spring games. We're going to talk about Wisconsin. We're going to talk about Minnesota. We're going to talk about Nebraska. A majority of these spring games now are in the books. And we want to talk that. We talked about what's happening off the field with the financial part of football. Now we're talking about what's happening on the field with these spring games. Okay? We'll look at Wisconsin. We'll look at Minnesota. We'll look at Nebraska. And now that we got Maryland and Rutgers this Saturday, but a majority of these spring games are in the books. There's been some transfers since then in the Big Ten that have been fairly big deals. And now this is kind of the period. This is where Charlie Jones was picked up last season. This is where Charlie Jones transferred out of Iowa during this spring period, and he was picked up by Purdue. And it could be probably said that without the transfer of Charlie Jones, Purdue would not have won the Big Ten West Division last season. So big-time players can be picked up at this time during the season. Tony coming aboard here today. He's thinking maybe Fridays on Peacock. That's something because Peacock has some exclusive games. Maybe they're moving to a Friday. That could be, because what is it, 8 games? Something like that I think Peacock has exclusively on the streaming service. So maybe that could be a pairing that could happen here down the road. But getting back to the on-the-field stuff, spring games mostly in the books. This is a time for teams to figure out what they are going to do in the transfer portal. This is kind of the final push. The spring games allow us as a public, allow us as fans to look at the picture a little bit more clearly, to kind of look at how are kids gelling together on certain seasons, how are the transfers that came in gelling with the kids from the previous regime kind of thing. So we will get into that, maybe talk about some transfers. And if you have topics that you want to talk about here tonight, Big Ten related and beyond, leave them in the comments. And, of course, the phone line is open as well. Let's talk about spring games. Because this past weekend, we had a majority of Big Ten West spring games. And really, I'm really only going to be able to comment on what I saw. And those are the Big Ten Network spring games, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Nebraska. Because there were things that really stood out in those spring games to me. And the more I kind of watch, the more I maybe doubt myself. I don't know if I want to say that, but the more I'm like, oh, maybe things in the West are going to be a little bit different. All right, let's dive into it. I want to start first with the Wisconsin Badgers. It was a typical late April day in the Midwest. Snow, of course, and then it cleared up later on. But I will say this about Wisconsin. Tanner Mordecai goes out and throws 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 early interceptions in that spring game. And when he threw them, he did not look good throwing them. I'll say that right now. I'll say that right off the bat, and I'll say that very confidently. This was a guy that maybe wasn't, when it wasn't his fault per se, it was thrown a little bit behind the receivers. To me, it looked like Tanner Mordecai wasn't exactly gelling with his wide receivers, right? The new ones, the old ones. There were some decent plays that he made, but this offense really seemed to look better when they leaned on Braylon Allen, when they leaned on Ches Malusi in this running game. Typical Wisconsin football, get the big bodies moving, and then things get moving forward, and they put points on the board. That's what I saw from the Wisconsin spring game. So maybe we're thinking Wisconsin's going to come out here, they're going to throw 40 times a game, and they still could do that. But this, what I saw in that Madison spring game, once the weather cleared up, so did their offense a little bit. But here's the deal, man. You play in the Big Ten Conference. You play in Wisconsin, outside of Minnesota. Wisconsin is probably the weather state that you most need to worry about when you get into November. You're going to have to play in these games. Badgers still have a way to go. Maybe we need to talk more about their defense. Maybe we need to talk more about what they're doing on that side of the ball, and maybe things are looking better on that side of the ball than originally anticipated. When I look at the Badgers, depth at wide receiver will be key. When I look all around this spring, I maybe don't see a guy that's going to stand out at wide receiver. I see some good talents. I see Chimere Dike. I see the transfer Bryson Green. I see players. But right now, I just don't see players that can stand out as a number one receiver and really separate themselves from the pack. This is going to be a depth room. This is going to be a room that maybe a guy doesn't even get 1,000 yards this season. Maybe there's a guy with 950 and 900 and 800 and 700 and so on and so forth. Maybe it's the wealth is going to be spread around more than we think it is in Wisconsin. Can one guy stand out? Maybe. Maybe it could be USC former 4-star transfer top 100 player C.J. Williams. Maybe it could be that, Maybe. But Wisconsin has a lot of work to do as we look forward, I believe, to the 2023 season. Let's talk about the Nebraska Cornhuskers, because this was a very interesting spring game for many reasons. Very interesting spring game for the Huskers. Couldn't hold on to the ball. Man, how many combined turnovers were there in the Wisconsin and Nebraska spring games? There was a lot. A lot of turnovers between the Huskers and the Badgers. Struggled holding on to the football. Maybe you could credit Tony White's aggressive defense going after the football. Maybe you could do that. But this was an offense that had some bright spots, but the majority of this was they've still got some work to do. But I will say this as positives for Nebraska. When I watched that game, here's what I saw. I look out there and I think Jeff Sims looks good. I don't think he blew everybody away. I don't think he was great. I'll say this, though. I think he was better than Tanner Mordecai. That's what I saw. I know the spring games are very different and stuff, but that's at least what I saw. Right? I saw Tanner Mordecai, or I should say, I saw Jeff Sims go out there, and he played well, which is what he needed to do. He needed to prove it in a game type of scenario where he can have a little bit of a leg up on the injured Casey Thompson as we approach fall camp. You got Jeff Sims, who's built up a lot of momentum. You have Jeff Sims that's built up a lot of confidence. Where are things going to stand with everybody else right now? He fits into this offense. Let me talk more about Nebraska. Maybe their highest profile transfer was Eric Gilbert, tight end, played at LSU, played at Georgia. He had multiple drops in this game. And I think the first one, maybe he was in heavy traffic, but for a guy that a lot of people are looking forward to watching, that was kind of a little bit of disappointing to kind of see him not be the most sure-handed guy, because you want a sure-handed guy at tight end. You want that guy that can haul it in, and you want a guy that you can lean on, especially when you get into the red zone. That was something. When I looked at Nebraska, it was tough in some portions, especially when they didn't score as well in the second half. There's a lot to work on. Look, for these programs that are turning over in the Big Ten, you look at your Wisconsins, your Nebraskas, and then, of course, a lot of attention has been paid out to Colorado in other parts of the college football world. It's just not easy to turn things over just right away, and all of a sudden we're going to bring in all these transfers, and all of a sudden we're going to be a great football team. Because sometimes it works, but a lot of times it doesn't work. You need to build a culture, and a lot of times these spring games are going to be messy on the field and in the sky. So that's, if you're a Wisconsin fan, if you're a Nebraska fan, the sky's not falling, but it definitely isn't what you anticipated. Let's talk about the team that I thought had the best game last Saturday, and that's the Minnesota Golden Gophers. This is a team, ladies and gentlemen, that you should watch out for. This is a team that has players on offense. I don't know quite yet where I'm willing to rank them on the offensive side of the ball. We're just getting through spring practice. Let my mind digest a little bit as we continue to work our way towards the beginning of the 2023 season. But, man, when I look at Minnesota, I see a deep running back room. Like I saw what Zach Evans was able to do. I know Sean Tyler, the transfer from Western Michigan, is going to be good, and Bryce Williams is still there. Where maybe last season you leaned so heavily on Muhammad Ibrahim, this year I think there's going to be more depth in this running back room. You're going to see guys step up in different ways. Zach Evans is one of those guys that showed that he can burst a man. It's one cut and gone. It's that explosiveness in the running game. And then I look at some good players in the passing game. Lemeke Brockington stepped up at the end of last season, and he looked pretty good in the spring game as well. There are players, you look at slant route after slant route after slant route after slant route, from Ethan Kaliakmanis to transfer Elijah Spencer. There is talent, folks, on this Minnesota team. Okay, if you're a West Division team right now and you thought, well, Minnesota's got Michigan on the schedule and Minnesota's got Ohio State on the schedule, I just don't know. It's not their year, whatever. Fleck is leveled off at 8 wins. If that's what you're thinking, you better check yourself, because Minnesota is a team they could possibly be better on offense after losing maybe one of the best offensive players in Golden Gopher history. On the defensive side of the ball, they got some work to do. They've got some development to do, but that's the kind of program this is. This is a developmental program at Minnesota. This is a program that a lot of times gets a lot out of a little. This is a PJ Fleck program that is great at developing talent. You got Wally back there, one of the best young corners in the Big Ten. You've got Tyler Newman back there at safety. You've got talent in the secondary. You've got some solid players coming back. But can Minnesota put it all together? I trust Joe Rossi to put it all together. That's what I trust. We know what Minnesota can be. We know what Minnesota can do. They got a tough out-of-conference game against North Carolina. They open up the season at home against Minnesota. Earlier on, I thought the line just came out for that game a week or so ago, where it's an 8-point spread. After the spring game, give me a 10-point spread for Minnesota. I said it before. I thought week one, we're many, many months away from that game between the Huskers and the Gophers. But as we sit here and as we stand right here and right now, I honestly believe that Minnesota is probably the favorite. Probably think that maybe Minnesota is a little bit of a better team right now. They seem to be a good team. Can Minnesota be a great team? How much can Ethan Kaliak-Manis progress forward? I think are the questions that need to be asked. Remember, Brevin Spanford, great tight end, didn't play in the spring game. Chris Ottman-Bell, their top returning wide receiver, didn't play in the spring game. Okay, this is an offense, ladies and gentlemen, that they're going to have the horses. And Minnesota might surprise some people nationally, but as you sit here in Big Ten country and as we all are in this Big Ten circle, you know that Minnesota's probably going to have a pretty decent team this season. So if they can get by Nebraska to open up the season, maybe they can beat North Carolina on the road. I think that's going to be an underrated non-conference game nationally this season. They could have a pretty good record going into that Michigan game here early in the season for Minnesota. Look at the flag behind me. Minnesota. I know it's a spring game, and I know I shouldn't overreact, but man, I honestly believe Minnesota and Wisconsin are maybe a little bit closer together. And now we've got this spring transfer portal period. Who knows what's going to happen? Minnesota, they've got to be in the discussion, folks. They've got to be in the discussion for the Big Ten West right now. They've got to be. They've got to be right now in the discussion. Let's get to some comments here. Iowa fans have their fingers crossed for A.J. Henning that just entered the portal, as well as possibly R.J. Moten. Man, when I look at A.J. Henning, I tweeted it immediately when I saw that tweet come across the feed. A.J. Henning to Iowa just makes sense. Iowa needs a wide receiver. Look, I'm not saying that A.J. Henning is this awesome talent, but when I look at Iowa and how desperately they need pass catchers, Cade McNamara on the team, Eric All on the team, the fit seems to make sense, and Iowa should pursue A.J. Henning, and Iowa should go in that general direction. Will they? That remains to be seen, but that's something that they should do as well right there. Gerald says, well, maybe we don't need any more Wolverines. Maybe we're good, but a lot of people thought when A.J. Henning entered the transfer portal that he was in a good spot. He's in a good spot where he could maybe end up in Iowa City. Jared Jones chiming in, hey, if that Iowa wide receiver room, if that's bolstered up a little bit, if that kind of takes a step up, you better watch out because there could be some good things happening for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Iowa has a defense that is very good. Iowa has a better option at quarterback. They have a running back in Caleb Johnson that should be able to get the job done. They have good things happening right now in Iowa City. This is a good team. This is a team that will be in contention for the West Division title. This will be a team that may be able to make it to Indianapolis. Adding an A.J. Henning or other wide receivers, that could maybe bolster some things as well. Mike chiming in. I liked Nebraska quarterback and his boy Billy Kemp. Man, when you talk about Billy Kemp, that was a guy that really stood out to me as well in that game. And when you look at the receivers, Marcus Washington is a returning receiver from last year. But, man, Billy Kemp, a lot of people have been talking about Billy Kemp. A lot of people have been all on board with that guy, the transfer from Virginia. And he looked really good in this offense, and he looked like he could make some plays and maybe be one of the top wide receivers on this Nebraska team. Tony chiming in saying the Gophers will be elite. Elite. let's kind of venture back to the TV discussion we were having before. Jared Jones chiming in. Imagine these games in the same week. Let's talk about Ohio State and Maryland, Michigan, Nebraska, USC, UCLA. That's a rivalry game, so that would be played probably the last game of the season. But I'll play along. I'll play along. Penn State, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan State. And I'm assuming you mean this season, upcoming 2023. 2 of those games get moved to Big Ten Network and FS1. A 4th window would be great in certain weeks. Maybe not every week. Maybe not the scenario that I maybe laid out at the beginning, but maybe every now and then. But do you pick and choose? How do you do that? A 4th window. But the thing is, your 4th window is Big Ten After Dark. Is Nebraska and Michigan aren't playing at 10:30 or 9:30 or whatever it is at night. They're just not. They're going to play on the West Coast. So, yeah, you want a 4th window, but that 4th window has to be reserved for teams up on the West Coast. And right now, you only got 2. You only got 2 out there. You only got 2. Only got 2. Mike saying the first upset in the Big Ten will be Minnesota getting beat by Nebraska. I think that's going to be a pretty solid game. I'm really excited about that game. That game is in Minneapolis. I am hopeful to get a media credential for that game. I would love to cover that game here just down the road. Down the road. Jared says Minnesota doesn't get the respect that they deserve. Back to you won 11 games a couple of whatever ago, a couple of years ago back in 2019, and then 8 win seasons, 9 win seasons. To do that at Minnesota, of all places, Minnesota, to do that there, that's great. To win at that level is great, and maybe they just need to keep on building this going forward. Tony, USA Today says Minnesota has the 2nd hardest schedule behind Mississippi State. It's 2. When you got to play Michigan, you got to play Ohio State in your cross division. You got to play North Carolina on the road out of conference. We know how good Drake May is. It's going to be a tough schedule, ladies and gentlemen. Minnesota is not going to have it easy. Let me tell you that much. But it's a good team, and it's a shame that they have what they have right now, because if they if you put them maybe in Wisconsin's schedule, who knows if they could maybe win 10 games this season. But it's going to be tough. But if they can get by Nebraska at home, if they can somehow get by North Carolina on the road, or maybe even if they lose to North Carolina, they can still be a solid team going into Michigan. But they got Michigan followed by Iowa, followed by Michigan State, followed by Illinois. Like that's a tough stretch for Minnesota. That is a tough stretch for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. It is not going to be easy for Minnesota. But this is a good team. If they end up going 7-5, that's going to be a pretty good 7-5 football team. I'll just say that. Not a good 4th window. I'll tell you that much. The problem is with the 4th window is that the 4th window is on the Pacific Coast. That's the problem with the 4th window. That's the problem. Sunshine Design tuning into a Friday game, no question. There for Mr. Design. So Friday nights seem to be good, but some people like them, some people don't. We'll see. Iowa and Minnesota could decide the Big Ten West. Minnesota hasn't beaten Iowa in 7 years. PJ Fleck has an Iowa problem. And it's in Iowa City. Could be one of the biggest Big Ten games of the year. Could be CBS. Could be NBC. Could be Big Noon. Could be all that. Who knows? Who knows where we could be at that point during the season for big exposure. And we know the Florida Rosedale is one of the best rivalry games out there between the Hawkeyes and the Golden Gophers. That's like the one thing. PJ Fleck has done a really, really good job at Minnesota. It's just they haven't been able to beat Iowa. That Iowa problem continues to exist for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Very much looking forward to this season for Minnesota, but those two games where they got to go play against Michigan, where they got to go play against Ohio State, that's going to be very, very difficult. They get a bad draw out of the East, and then that other team, Michigan State. Like it's not you're drawing a Rutgers or an Indiana or somebody else. Even a Maryland, you're drawing a team in Michigan State. I know they weren't great last season, but this is a Michigan State team that should be solid, and maybe it should be a competitive game. Right now, if I'm picking that game right now, I'm picking Minnesota. Jared, you and me both. I would love to sit in on the schedule making in 2024. 3 good games each week, no more than that, I'm guessing, on any given week. Now remember, 2024 will also be the sophomore year of Dante Moore at UCLA, right? And maybe UCLA will be one of those teams that'll be in the category with the Wisconsins and the Iowas. I think UCLA is one of those teams where they're very unpredictable right now. This is a UCLA team. Could they win 6 and 7 wins and then fire Chip Kelly? Sure, that could happen. Or UCLA, you see what they're picking up and the momentum they are gaining in recruiting, having one of the best players in the country come over to UCLA. This is a team that could maybe get on up there, especially with LA playing in the Rose Bowl, Big Ten exposure, all these things. Maybe the momentum is building for Chip Kelly. Maybe last year was just the tipping point. Maybe that was just the start. And now they're really going to start to grow. But man, there are going to be great games each and every single week. That's why these Fox, CBS, and NBC deals are so big. Tony has a sleeper team, and it's the team with the new helmets and the new jerseys. Well, not new. New is old. Old is new. That kind of thing. Maryland. When I look at the Terps, I see a team. Talia Tungavailoa has a lot of experience under his belt. This is a team that brings back Deshaun Jones. This is a team that brings in Caden Prather, a transfer wide receiver from West Virginia. That should have an impact. They bring back Corey Dyches at tight end. They've got good guys in the running game. They've got Roman Hemby. Right? This is a Maryland team that offensively should be good. But, and there's always a but can Maryland get it done against some of the better teams on their schedule? The problem with Maryland has always been they're playing in the Big Ten East. It's very difficult. But if you look at the Maryland schedule, if you really dive into what they're playing with, they could really start the schedule very, very strong. Okay, because their non-conference schedule is not very difficult. And then you look at Towson, Charlotte, Virginia, all at home to start the season. They go on the road to East Lansing to play Michigan State. They go on the road. That's kind of the one game. Could go either way. But then they come back with Indiana. There's a huge possibility. Towson, Charlotte, Virginia, Michigan State, Indiana. Maryland could start 5-0 and definitely be a ranked team. You'd have a win over Michigan State. Then you go on the road to Ohio State. Maybe lose that one, come back and beat Illinois. Maybe you beat Illinois. Maybe you beat Northwestern. This is a team that I think your even games, your toss-ups are probably going to be at Michigan State. You're probably going to be home against Illinois. Nebraska, I think they're a little bit better than Nebraska right now. But this is a team. They get Michigan at home. They get Penn State at home. They got to go on the road to Ohio State, but man, you never know. Maybe this is the year that Maryland breaks out as a team. Maybe they just needed to change their uniforms all along and go back to more towards the script terps and embrace tradition to get back to winning. 2024 Tier 1 Buckeyes, Wolverines, Nittany Lions, Trojans. That's a pretty darn good Tier 1. Like, look what USC is doing. They just get that transfer in Bear Robinson from Georgia that a lot of people are high on, and what they're doing in recruiting is insane right now. I said it last week, and I've said it a million times, and I'm going to say it a million more times. We don't know what LA coming to the Big Ten is all about. We don't know what USC coming to the Big Ten is all about. USC was a great program in the Pac-12, or at least they had a potential over the course of time. I should say they were a great program in the Pac-10 and the Pac-12. Now you put them in the conference like the Big Ten, playing Ohio State's, Michigan's, Penn State's, Michigan State's, Wisconsin, playing those types of teams and having the exposure of the Foxes, the CBSs, the NBCs. The potential is untapped right now for USC football. And then you look at Tier 2, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State, UCLA, Nebraska, Minnesota. There's a lot of great games out there. That's the thing. When you stack in more teams and teams get better, someone in that group is losing 5 games in a season. Someone in that group is losing 6 games, and someone may not live up to expectations. Who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? W. Scott Geyer checking in. How good are you expecting Wisconsin to be in Luke Fickell's first year? I talked about their spring game before where they were less than impressive. And now it kind of makes me think about Wisconsin. And I know I shouldn't put this much onto a spring game, but, and there's always a but when I look at Wisconsin, I believe this is a team that could be good, and they have the potential to be a West Division champion. They have the potential to be a team that can go out and they can win a whole lot of games. They need to come together as a team. You know, I saw a lot of players maybe not on the same page in that spring game. And like I said, I know it's a spring game, and I know things are going to probably get better for Wisconsin. But whenever there's a lot of turnover, whenever there's a lot of transfers coming in, it's hit or miss. Sometimes you get Kenneth Walker at Michigan State. Sometimes you get 2022 Scott Frost at Nebraska. It can go both ways. I trust Luke Fickell as a coach to bring it all together. I trust Phil Longo as an offensive coordinator to make this Wisconsin team explosive. They just got to make it work for them. Their offense is not going to look the same like it was at North Carolina. If you're expecting that explosive type of offense like you saw at North Carolina, then it's just not going to happen. They're going to have to adapt it to what works for Wisconsin. And what I saw there was possibly leaning on the running game a little bit more, taking a little bit of pressure off. Tanner Mordecai maybe wanted to make some big plays in his first real public appearance as the Wisconsin quarterback, and it just didn't turn out that way. When I look at the Badgers' schedule, we're talking about Friday nights here on the show. Wisconsin at Purdue got moved to a Friday night. Maybe some sort of trap game there before a bye week. Iowa, right now, I could see that as a close game. Illinois on the road, I could see that as a close game. They play Ohio State. Right now, they look like they're better than Nebraska. But Minnesota, when I look at Luke Fickell in his first year, the talent is there. But how can it all come together? Can it come together in year number 1? Can the defense replace guys like Nick Herbig and Keanu Benton? This team will probably be in the race for the Big Ten West title. I don't see them having a year like last year. Programs like Wisconsin, even when they go through coaching changes, usually don't have back-to-back 6-6, 7-6, whatever type of seasons. This is a team, I think their basement for me seems to be 8-4. And a lot of that is because of the schedule that they have in front of them. That's how I feel about that. Gerald chiming in on our fourth window discussion. Would Michigan or Ohio State ever see the fourth window headed west? And would USC and UCLA ever see the first window going east? I kind of feel like they've locked it at 2 and 3. I talked about that earlier in the show. Where do you expect? I could maybe see USC going on the road. They might not like it. I could see USC and UCLA going on the road to Ohio State, whatever school out east and playing a big noon game, but they're not hosting a game at 9 o'clock local time in the morning. That's just not happening. So some of these, and like I said, some of these teams that are more out east, traveling out west, if we do a fourth window and if we do an after dark time slot, I just don't see it happening. So some of these teams are going to be playing in some time slots more than others. That's how I feel right now. Lay off of it, says Greg. I love it. Minnesota and Maryland are due for breakout years. I am saying that they look good. I am saying that they appear to be building momentum. I still firmly believe that Minnesota is a team that's going to be in contention in the West. That's more because I believe the West is going to be clustered at the top. I think there's going to be a lot of teams in contention in the Big Ten West. Minnesota's Big Ten West championship hopes are hurt by Ohio State and Michigan because let's not even factor in the non-conference game against North Carolina. Let's talk about let's just say you lose Ohio State and Michigan because Gophers probably aren't winning those games. You probably got to, at the very least, you lose one game the rest of the way in the Big Ten Conference. That's 3 conference losses. They're going to need some help along the way, some upsets along the way to win the Big Ten West. I think that's the thing that's hurting them right now is the Michigan game and the Ohio State game. They need to be so perfect outside of that's going to put a lot of pressure on them, and that's going to make things difficult, I think, for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Can't wait to see these West Coast teams play in Kinnick, Camp Randall, Huntington Bank Stadium in the middle of November. Talked about this in a video earlier on the channel. Cold weather, will it impact some of these Big Ten or some of these West Coast teams going out there? Remember, USC and UCLA will probably play the last game of the season. So the third week of November is probably the latest you're going to see, and that's when it was single digits for that Iowa-Minnesota game this year in Minneapolis. So, weather in early November can be kind of unpredictable. Sometimes it can be 50s, it can be maybe even 60s, but it can also be 20s and 30s, that kind of thing. We'll see. They might have to adjust their style a little bit. You get a snowy game, you see a raining game, you see more conditions. Might have to adjust their play. Sunshine Design chiming in on Wisconsin. Quarterback play for Wisconsin will determine their season. If the kid is rocking it, Wisconsin will win the West. It's all about the camaraderie. It's all about the relationships with so many new moving parts coming into this offense, especially in the passing game. That's where things, and you saw it in the spring game, where maybe the timing was not exactly correct, or maybe things just didn't turn out that way. But it appears that Tanner Mordecai could be a good quarterback, and maybe he just needs more reps, and maybe he just needs to get going a little bit more. But we'll see. We'll see for Wisconsin. Yeah, the thing is, when you look at Nebraska and other teams where, oh my God, their offense didn't do good, then you got to, well, maybe their defense was just that good. That's the thing about a spring game. If one side doesn't look that good, you can maybe look more positive on the other, or vice versa. Yeah, our defense looked good, but what about our offense over there? So those are things that you kind of got to weigh back and forth. I know it's kind of tough seeing your team go against each other because you kind of got to weigh the good with the bad. As you kind of go down the line with that. Do you see USC or UCLA at home every week? Both either on the road or both at home. Here's what I think about LA, and here's how I feel about this. Getting USC and UCLA was obviously very big for the Big Ten. But there's got to be some sort of scheduling agreement in there because we probably go with a 3-6-6 model, 3 permanent opponents, and then 6-6 alternating years where you play every team in the Big Ten every 2 years. You got to think there's got to be some deal for these other teams in the Big Ten where they go to LA every year, where they're playing at USC or maybe at UCLA, or there's some sort of agreement where they get to access Los Angeles in some form or another every year. So there's got to be some dipping into LA in that form or another, but I think the scheduling is going to be, I would probably say it'd be an alternate, where maybe USC or UCLA would be at home because of that. I think that's what a lot of these Big Ten teams want. They want to have access. They want to play a game in sunny Southern California. Who wouldn't want to play a game in that kind of weather? Who wouldn't want to play a game at USC or UCLA instead of playing a game at Iowa in the middle of November? I think a lot of teams would. I think a lot of teams would. So I think they got to be going to LA pretty consistently, I believe. You could see them alternating to ensure a night game every Saturday as well from Sunshine Designed. Ohio State, just like I said, Ohio State and Michigan going west every year. I put out a video that said what I think will be the 3 permanent opponents. I saw USC as a permanent opponent for Ohio State, and I saw UCLA as a permanent opponent for Michigan. You're going to want those big games. The TV networks are going to want those big games. Everybody's going to want to see those big games. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Big Ten Ted Live tonight. A lot of good discussion in the comments about this TV deal, this 4th window. I'm here to present ideas. And I think that's a lot of what I did in that first segment. I honestly believe my opinion of what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to stand pat. I think we're going to stand pat at 16. I think the Pac-12 will survive. They might be the guinea pig for streaming. And then we'll see what happens with the Pac-12 from there. Remember, these things happen in spurts. They happen 2 by 2 by 2. It could happen. It could happen. It all depends what Tony Petitti and these college presidents are wanting to do at this point in time right here, right now. Very much looking forward to what's to come as well, coming down the road here on the channel on Big Ten Ted. Tomorrow, I will be having a video talking about who benefits. Which team, we're talking about 3-6-6 before, which teams maybe benefit the most from divisionless Big Ten football, if that's the way we go, starting in 2024, because there are some teams that definitely benefit from having no divisions in the Big Ten Conference as well. On Friday, I'm going to talk about, could 2023 be the final year for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan? Will it happen? Could it happen? So make sure you stay tuned for that as well. Mike chiming in. It's crazy how many Big Ten teams never changed the looks of their helmet. Speaking of Maryland earlier. Michigan, traditional helmet. Penn State, traditional helmet. Ohio State, traditional helmet. Wisconsin. Minnesota has made their helmet look more fancier a little bit, maybe a little bit more shiny so to speak. But generally, the Block M has stayed there. I know they've added some row the boat type of stuff on their helmets as well. Nebraska. The Big Ten is a very traditional conference. A lot of tradition in there as well. Jared is ready for the 2024 season, and that is going to be, look, that's something that I kind of want to talk about a little bit more this offseason as well is, man, it is going to be, 2024 is going to be like a season that we've never seen before. 16 teams in the SEC, Texas and OU. 16 teams in the Big Ten, USC and UCLA. Just the 12-team college football playoff. We were just at 4. A handful of years ago, we were just at 2. The 2024 season is going to be, coaches are going to have to prepare their guys for playing up to 16 games and 17 games. Where are we going to be next season how much further are we going to be from an NIL standpoint? Are we going to make any type of legislation changes? That's the thing. We just don't know what's going to happen, folks. We just don't know. There's so much unpredictability and the return of the college football video game as well, which always brings a lot of excitement to college football fans in late July and early August. There's so much changing in the world, and 2024 is just that season. 2023 almost seems a little bit like the end of an era, so to speak. And from 2023 moving to 2024, we are just ending an era that's been going on for a long time, and we are just going into a completely new stratosphere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are headed to places that we can't even think of right now, right? When astronauts go into space and they keep on going and they discover new things that they didn't even know could exist. I feel like that's the way we're going in college football right now. We are going into space. We are going into the darkness, and we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how great this 12-team playoff is going to be. What's going to happen with these group of 5 teams? What's going to happen with everybody, with all these things going on? There's so much going on. Gerald McKinley chiming in once again. Here's a question. I appreciate questions. Does a 12-team playoff, maybe more, we can talk about that in 2026, if they do away with auto bids, downplay the importance of winning the conference? Well, currently in the it's not proposed because it's going to happen. Currently in the upcoming 12-team college football playoff, it's the top 4 conference champions. The top 4 conference champions that get a bid that get a bye, I should say. That get a bye. So you have that. I think there is, because you want to get into those buys, you want to get in, and those are reserved only for conference champions. Looking at you, Notre Dame. Those are reserved only for conference champions. So winning your conference is going to be huge. If you're a member of the Big Ten, if you're a member of the SEC, you're pretty much always going to be in that top 4. It'd be a weird year if an SEC or a Big Ten team is not in a spot to be a top 4 conference champion. So that's why winning your conference is still very important. It's still extremely important, obviously. We go to 16, now that changes a little bit. If we go to 16 teams in 2026, I would like to see an 8+8 format. 8 conference champions and 8 at-large teams. That's what I would like to see. I think it kind of opens things up. You maybe have more of a March Madness feel, and you still get a lot of the elite teams. The Big Ten and the SEC are still going to have a lot of teams. You're still going to have a good amount of teams from other conferences as well. You get a good mixture of everything in a potential 8+8, 16-team playoff. But there is still going to be a need. There is still going to be conference championships to be won, and that's still going to be important, especially in the 12-teamer. where you need to be a conference champion to get that bye. Getting into that position to get those byes. Conference championship Saturday is going to be very interesting because if you have an upset, you have multiple upsets that could get somebody into the byes and that could knock somebody out of the byes. You could have teams on the bubble in that particular situation. Would that force Notre Dame to choose a conference to join? Would they consider the Big Ten? Here's the thing about the Irish. If they join a conference contractually, they have to do it with the ACC until 2036. That's a part of their contract with the ACC. Okay, so if they join a conference, it's going to be the ACC, at least right here and right now in the short term, or at least for the next 10 years. Yeah, it would definitely benefit them to join the Big Ten Conference. I'll definitely say that, and it would benefit the Big Ten as much as maybe I'm not a huge fan of Notre Dame. I still believe that them joining, there's going to be a time and there's going to be a place. I don't know when it's going to be. I don't know where it's going to be, but it's going to happen where eventually their backs are going to be against the wall and they're going to have to join a league, whether it's because of the college football playoff, whatever reason, scheduling. Here's another thing about Notre Dame. Okay, their deal with NBC just is not as big of a deal anymore. Because even in the mid-2000s, okay, they were on national TV half the season. Probably a majority of the season, right, when you factor in the away games and how much of a draw they are. Now, we just talked about it. With all these networks and streaming, everybody can be seen anywhere. That was the deal with Notre Dame back in the day as well. You'll be on national TV every week. Now everybody's on national TV every week. The Big Ten, all across, they're on national TV every week. Right, we got Fox, you got CBS, you got NBC, FS1 can be seen nationwide. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not as big of a deal anymore for the Big Ten, for Notre Dame, that exclusive NBC deal. And maybe that's another reason. Maybe eventually, if NBC gets into play with rumored NBA media rights and all these other things, maybe Notre Dame is in a position then to join a conference. But eventually, there's going to be a reason. There's going to be a scenario that their backs are going to be against the wall, and they're going to be like, finally, we're going to have to join a conference. It's going to have to happen. It's going to have to happen. We are on the same wavelength, Gerald. Said that probably right as you typed that comment. Going after the NBA, that's something, because if you sign a big deal with the Big Ten, you sign a deal with the NBA, like those NBA media rights are going to be spendy. Those media rights are going to be almost as high as it gets, okay, if they go after the NBA. And we know, because ESPN, of course, is the primary rights holder of the NBA right now. And boy, if they go after the NBA, ESPN, we know this dire situation they are in financially right now. Maybe this is NBC's time to pounce. But if they get the Big Ten, Sunday Night Football, and the NBA, where does Notre Dame sit in all of that? Where does Notre Dame sit? That's something that's got to be talked about very, very soon. The suits and ties at NBC have some discussions to have. They have some decisions to make. There's no question about that. Good stuff here tonight. Good discussion on the live stream here tonight. Very much appreciate everybody for coming aboard Big Ten Ted Live tonight. Remember, we are live every Wednesday night, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central Time, talking all things Big Ten. If you want to see a future live stream topic talked about, if you want to see future video, what do you want to see? Make sure you leave it in the comments. Make sure you just leave it somewhere where I can see it so we can get those ideas and we can get that in throughout the time here. Want to thank everybody for joining Big Ten Ted Live tonight. It's been a great show. Going to wrap it up here for tonight's program. We've got videos coming up later this week. We've got all sorts of things happening here on the channel. This is spring transfer portal period time where we could be moving in different directions. We could be moving in a different spot right here in the Big Ten. Teams can get better. Teams can lose some guys. Nebraska's got to lose some guys to get under 85 scholarships. So stay tuned to the channel and Twitter as well to stay up to date on all things Big Ten. We're going to see you next week here live, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central Time for Big Ten Ted Live next week. Until then, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.